We never got the island's name, mostly because by the time Rimon and I landed there, most of the inhabitants had 3 feet and an avocado grave. Rimon, are you okay? I think so, but my wing. It's clipped. Are you bleeding? No, it's just my feathers, he said, showing his now revealed, shiny bone arm. But Reverie, I'm not going to be able to fly. That's all right. We can stay here. It doesn't look so bad, I said, glancing around the mossy forest where we'd landed. We'll go home when you're ready. Yeah, it already seems like that weird wind is gone, he said. Good. I took a few steps forward, getting a better look at everything. My steps felt squishy, so I reached down and pressed the ground. The dirt here is weird. It's soaked and stinky. Not good for a corpse at all. That's odd. Oh, hey, there's a light over there, Rimon pointed. Oh, yay, it must be a town. Let's go. We set off walking towards the light, trekking over that weird, stinky dirt. It seemed to get more wet and boggy. It made me shiver in disgust every 3 feet. But it still didn't take us too long to reach the civilization. We emerged from the forest, but stopped short, 'cause something weird was going on. It was pretty late evening by then, but there was a ton of people pacing around the buildings and acting funny. One woman was slowly snipping all of the roses off the trellis in front of her house. One guy was washing windows where there weren't no glass no longer. Another was pacing back and forth, carrying a long lamp. And that was just the ones closest to us. Rimon, what's going on? Don't know, maybe they're nest shocked or sleepwalking or something. Oh, if that's the case, we'd better smack 'em up. You want to get close to 'em? Certainly not. Let me throw a rock. I scooped one up and hit the pacey lamp guy square atween the shoulder blades. He whipped around with a scream, saw us, screamed the word welcome, and set off towards us like he was on fire. Rimon chirped and I screamed. We bumped into each other, then fled with the man hot on our heels. Oh, newcomers, we just love visitors, the man screamed with glee, viciously swinging the lamp as he chased us. You're crazy, Rimon yelled back as we ran like jackrabbits. Unfortunately, we didn't know where we were running to, so we jumped a bush and landed in a stream with a splash. Thinking quickly, Rimon grabbed my arm and pulled me up against the bank so the guy sailed right over us, landed in the stream, and blew up. With a fizzle and a pop, he was gone. Rimon and I got right out of the water thinking it was going to blow us up too, but nothing happened. Rimon? I don't know, Reverie. I don't know. What should we do? Well, let's skirt around the village and see if we can find any place we can hide for the rest of the night. Good idea. We could find an old outbuilding, I made quotation mark motions, or something to stay in. Oh, nice word. You think so? Yes, very civilized. I beamed and we set out walking on a high note. We skirted around the village, staying well within the trees, but halfway around we almost walked right into a man in an apron. He was wonderfully occupied with picking up fallen avocados and dropping them into this filthy and disgusting bucket. We stayed absolutely still, and he suddenly hefted the bucket and walked back to the village with nary a glance. Guess we'd provoked the other guy. We went on, leaving the weirdos behind. It was 4 a.m. when we got halfway around the village and spotted a light shining from the opposite direction from it. Must be another house up there, I speculated. Yeah, let's get going, Rimon replied with a wary glance at the ominous glow. We continued our trek, alert in case someone from that other light came upon us of a sudden. At last, we, wonders of wonders, found a treehouse. It had no ladder, but it weren't too difficult to get up there if you had a parcel of ingenuity. It was empty, thankfully, though there was a bunch of peanut shells, rocks, slingshots, and an irritated caterpillar. Rimon and I agreed that nutcases, by large, can't make any sort of climbing, so we settled in for the night, feeling quite safe. According to Rimon's watch, it was about 10 a.m. when we woke the next morning. We jumped and scurried down and set off walking once more, but not before Rimon circled the treehouse a few times to set its location in his mind. Maybe we could get to the shore hereabouts and do some fishing, Rimon suggested. Yeah, I said, hungry. You remember those pancakes Mater made last week? Oh, those were so good with all the nuts and little seeds. I laughed, chirped like a true pigeon. Nuh-uh, I'm a crow, he said. You might look like a crow, but you walk like a pigeon. I demonstrated the bob-headed waddle. Do I really? He asked, a little horrified. No, but I got you, didn't I? Reverie, he exclaimed in mock scolding. Be more serious. But then he started waddling and we both laughed. Hi, who are you? A voice beside us suddenly asked. Ah! I shrieked. Chirp! Rimon screamed. It was the lady who'd been snipping off her own roses. My, oh my, did you just get in? Where is your ship? She asked sweetly, her eyes mild in her bloated face. Ooh, we don't got a ship, I answered, looking around for an escape route. Oh, really? How did you get here then? She asked. Next, her voice horribly pleasant. Rimon and I exchanged a glance that said, let's run. But before we could act on it, 5 more of the bloated weirdos came out of the forest. Oh, drought, I muttered. That wicked wind blew us here, Rimon answered the lady. Oh, how terrible, she cried with great delight. We were soon surrounded and being greeted like lost relatives. We were irrefusably urged to go back to town for a welcome meal. In the daylight, all the weirdos seemed to be able to function normally, but they were still odd. They's was all bloated, for one thing, like they'd sucked up a pufferfish, and they's was all full of odd ticks. Here we are, come into the community hall. We'll have a great welcome. Welcome, 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 everyone else piped up, interrupting the man they called mayor. Celebration, he finished, then turned to the Rose Lady. Mrs. McRose, do you think, the doctor, do you think? Ah, yes, I do think, McRose turned to a younger guy who was twitching uncontrollably. Shield, go and tell Dr. Brockovic. He hasn't dined with us in forever. Forever, the crowd repeated it. He can, McRose went on, bring the children. Surely they've studied enough for today. As she spoke, a baby earthquake hit, lasting only a moment or two. Our host didn't seem to notice it. I quick bent down and touched the earth. It was still mushy and gross with a faint, unpleasant smell. It gave me the shivers. Oh, I hope I made enough food. We were a little low on pies. A man in a big white cap wailed out. He rushed ahead of us into the community hall. We went in after and were astonished to see every table bent beneath the pressure of so much food. Bushels of food, barges of food. Oh dear, we are a bit short, McRose about shrieked. Can you possibly scrape up some more? Mayor begged the white hat dude. We can't be so short when we have company. The man nodded, looked grim, then rushed off to scrape up some more. Just as they were forcing us to sit, Shield returned with a very thin and nervous-looking man. Oh, doctor, Miss McRose cried. How are the children? Oh, very well, Mrs. McRose, the doctor said with a sort of gulp. Very well. I see we have 2 guests. Oh, yes, they just blew in, she said with a twittery laugh. They are, well, what are your names? Happy to have an excuse to stand, we shot out of those sticky chairs. Reverie. I'm Rimon, with an awkward little wave. The doctor looked with great surprise at Rimon, don't know why, but he soon rallied. Mrs. McRose, I do believe I ought to take these 2 along for our swimming lesson. Oh, you think so? She asked, eyes wide. Indeed I do. I am certain by the looks of them that they splash. When he pronounced the last word, everyone gasped and stepped back. Oh, yes, go along, dears, go along. We can't have, oh no. McRose ushered us to the doctor, nearly shoving and pushing. Doctor received us with a grim, nervous, almost desperate look. We were happy to get out of their hole, and I figured we could take one old man better than an entire town. So, with the bloats calling out to invite us for supper, Dr. Brockovich hurried us outside and got us directly hidden behind the general store. Did you eat anything? He desperately inquired. No, Rimon replied with me nodding. What are you? Why do you have feathers? He asked next. I've always had feathers. Why do you ask? It's all right. Are you certain you did not eat anything from this island? Positive, you creep. Now what's going on here? I demanded to know. Why's everyone so kooky? He immediately looked all sad. It was the guacamole. I told them to stop eating it, but they wouldn't listen. We looked at him like he was nuts. But let us go. We've got to get out of town. Come with me to the lookout, he said. Rimon and I exchanged a quick glance, wondering what to do, But we decided to follow the nervous man, as we still knew we could drop him pretty easily. Dr. Brockovich took us to his house, to the lookout that was upon the hill over town, where he was living with a bunch of scared children, the refugees from the town below. There we learned the story of the ill-fated island. 3 weeks before we had arrived, the doctor and the kids, his students, were on their annual week-long campout. They returned to find everyone in town suffering from some sort of illness. The doctor kept the children at the lookout for fear of contagion and tried to help the people. They couldn't be helped. One and all, they were sick as dogs, and they were still eating the avocados that had made them that way. Something had tainted the avo trees, and everyone had partaken of them as they were fresh and in season. The guacamole was addicting, and within inside a week, everyone was bloated and no longer themselves. It seemed like they weren't even human anymore. The doctor was terrified that they were becoming worse. He was terrified that they would snap like the guy with the lamp had done to us. So far, the townspeople had been out of their minds enough so he could keep them from storming the lookout for their kids. All they really cared about was eating, but it was clear that their transformation wasn't complete. When it was, what would they be? That night, Rimon and I returned to the village. Our job was to check in the general store for canned goods, as that was the only thing safe to eat on the island. And if our escape plan worked, we were going to need supplies. Rimon and I were doing it because it was impossible to have the doctor leave the kids. He was the only security they had left. We crept to the back of the store without being spotted and crawled in through a broken window which opened into the back office. Listening at the door raised no alarm, so we slowly opened it. A few lights flickered here and there. With their wavering gaze, we could see Mr. Muttons wandering up and down his aisles. It was not more than we expected. We slowly, steadily crept forward towards the third aisle on the left. Waiting for him to leave it at the upper end, we then went in and started collecting cans of whatever, because there was no time to look. His footsteps approached, so we ceased and desisted and went out into the next aisle. His footsteps entered the can aisle, and as he went down, we went up on the other side to keep a good distance from him. He paused right in front of where we'd taken some cans, and I started getting an even worse feeling in my stomach. After an eternity of 3 seconds, he moved on and went into the aisle we'd fled into while we went back into the can aisle. We quickly filled our bags the rest of the way and turned to creep back when Muttons went right past the end of our aisle and into the back office. Rimon and I looked at each other like, oh, persimmons. Then we went towards the front. Only one problem with that. Mrs. Muttons was at the counter. She was standing there, and in front of her on the counter was a ridiculous pile of change. She'd take about 75 cents and put it in the cash register, then look around like she was done, and then notice the change again, take another 75 cents and put it in the register, then do it all again over and over. She was getting increasingly irritated, too. Rimon and I skedaddled past her to the door and out the door without her noticing. I could have blessed that pile of change, though I did wonder if it would make her erupt eventually. Once outside, we made our careful way past the wanderers in the street. As long as we didn't touch them or make a big commotion, they really didn't notice us. We passed McRose. She had no roses left to cut, so she was just sitting all forlorn with her scissors surrounded by dead rose heads. Rimon and I successfully returned to the lookout, one step closer to getting out of that awful place. Dr. Brockovich had an escape plan, and it was all centered around the anchored ship on the other side of the village. We needed to steal that ship and get it to a place where the kids and everybody could get on it safely, as the doctor really didn't want to have to take the children through the village. You know, trauma and all that. The trouble was getting to it. The townspeople had broken up all the small boats to feed their cooking and baking fires. They probably would have done the same to the ship we wanted, except it was anchored too far out to reach thanks to their deadly fear of water. The doc and Rimon and I figured the best plan would be to have Rimon fly to the ship and take it. But first we had to fix his wing, and Dr. Brockovich was pretty sure he could rig up something to replace Rimon's lost pinion feathers. While he worked on that, we continued to make nightly supply runs into the town for the next few days. On the 6th day on the ill-fated island, Dr. B fitted Rimon with a pinion feather replacer he'd made, which looked to me like a put-together mess of straps and canvas. "How does it feel? Do you think you can fly?" I asked doubtingly. Feels okay. I think I can get lift, Rimon said, stretching out his wing, which made the canvas snap tight. He stepped away and launched himself into the air. He wobbled and nearly dived, but thankfully found his groove. When he landed safely, we all cheered. He practiced flying the rest of the day. Then when night finally fell, he set off for the ship. I paced around, praying. It was frightening to be without him. When at last he returned, he came back without the ship. "I'm going to need help sailing it," he announced as he landed. "What happened to you?" I announced as he landed. He looked at his side, which was bloody. His poor feathers were blood-spattered. "There was a man on the ship. He went into the sea." I nodded and said no more. Pigeons, like chickens, can be mean, you know. Dr. B wisely refrained from asking any identifying questions about the man. Rimon flew me and the 3 oldest kids to the ship. Dr. B was too heavy. I noticed the broken railing when Rimon dropped me off on the deck. Good, one less to worry about. Once assembled, the most obvious thing to do was to pull up the anchor. I tried to start the crank, but it wouldn't budge for nothing. But then somehow the 10-year-old kid cranked it up just fine. "Stupid crank," I muttered, going over to the steering apparatus. Rimon untied the sail with the help of 2 of the kids, while me and the 10-year-old Teddy manned the steering apparatus. Steering was a breeze, you know, after we almost crashed it into the island 15 times. You'd think something so big you could avoid in a giant ocean. Well, the earthquakes that kept a rumbling didn't help. With much pain and stress, we cruised it around to the dock on the south side of the island that was real close to the lookout. Dr. B was waiting for us and helped tie it off. We figured out how to drop the gangplank. Another earthquake hit as I was going down it, so my trip was short. We sat for a moment on solid ground and forced ourselves to relax. Then the supply hauling began. The ship's freshwater barrels were full, thankfully, but all the cans had to come. We hauled till sunrise, and we shoved the ship back away from the dock a little, for safety, a little or a lot, and settled in to take final stock. The taking of the stock was aggravating because we realized we were missing one crucial thing. The ship's atlas and logbook had been removed by the captain and taken into his home. Without that, we'd be sailing blind. Of all the time for him to have to take it, I grumbled. But of course, Dr. B told us it was customary. The man was a map-making connoisseur, so he always brought them ashore to tweak and copy. We'd have to go to the village one more time. The sun sank and darkness came over the land, heralded by another quake, this one the biggest yet. But after the shaking slowed and tapered off, a pregnant silence took its place. Rimon picked me up and flew off away from the ship and towards the town. Dr. B had told us how to find the right house, so Rimon flew over the village in tight circles as we searched for the roof that had a ship-shaped weather vane. "There it is," I cried with a pertinent finger point. "Okay, we'll land on the back porch, huh? Sounds good." Down we went. Cautiously, we opened the back door, but no one was in sight nor sound. We went in, going down the hall towards the captain's study. I could have kissed the floor for happiness because that place was empty too. Spread upon the desk was our heart's desire. We rolled up every squiggly line paper and packed them into Rimon's satchel. After getting everything remotely useful looking, we retraced our steps. On the back porch, as we were preparing to take flight in the strong moonlight, a sound, distinct and unmistakable sound, pierced the night. It was a baby's soft cry coming from the house across the dusty lane. Rimon and I looked at each other for a second, then started walking over there. We ain't monsters, you know. In the house, we saw a shadow pass across the living room door, so we crept up the stairs as quietly but as quickly as possible. Up them and into the main bedroom, we beheld the scene, the heartbreaking scene. McRose was up there, lying in bed and holding a baby she evidently had just given birth to. She looked at us and her eyes were clear and sane, even though they resided in a sickly and bloated face. The baby wasn't crying anymore, just peeping out from its blankie. The baby looked absolutely perfect. I reached down cautiously and lifted the baby from McRose's arms. McRose smiled and spoke her last. Miracle. Then her eyes rolled back and she began to shake. There wasn't time for anything. Tucking the blankie around the baby more securely, we turned to go, got to the door, then saw what was slowly coming up the stairs. We beheld the last stage of the avocado sickness, and I saw my own death reflected in its eyes. Rimon slammed the door shut a split second before the monster slammed into it with a force that cracked the plaster on the walls. Rimon sent the little bedside table through the window and pulled me and the baby out onto the porch roof. My feet barely touched shingles when the monster broke through the heavy oak door. Rimon pulled me onto the roof above just as it reached the window. Rimon couldn't take off from the tiny bit of roof out the window. He needed the larger expanse of the full roof. In a moment, the monster was on the roof too, but in half a moment, Rimon took flight and we were out of its grasp. The howl it gave as we left is one I can't forget, and it was echoed throughout the town as we went over it. I could only tear up and thank God we weren't down there. As we were passing over the forest, another earthquake struck, making the trees shake violently. The moment we got anywhere close to the ship, I started screaming, "Pull up the anchor!" I didn't care how far from the beach they were. They needed to be farther. "Okay," Dr. B yelled back, and they went to it. Rimon suddenly veered off to the left. "Rimon? Look down!" I did and wished I hadn't. The monsters were tracking us. Rimon had turned to give the ship more time to get further out. Knowing the monster's gold medal athleticism, it was a good idea. Rimon climbed higher, circling. The baby was asleep. The monsters were jumping. Rimon, with his eagle-sharp eyes, saw the town's buildings collapsing. "The quake!" he exclaimed. The quake was breaking the island apart. A geyser of water shot up from the far end of town. Rimon turned on a dime towards the ship. Dropping me and the baby safely off, he raced back towards the beach. In an instant, I saw the issue. The ship was moving out, but it was going to pass way too close to the long, rocky arm of the shore. The monsters were going to get to our ship. Rimon flew dangerously close to the knot of them, one leaping and almost snatching his tail feathers, but he had to get all of their attention. He took off back inland with the quake still violently shaking the island, the monsters following with frightening height and speed. Geysers of water began now shooting up everywhere as the island went to pieces at the center. It spurred the ship onward with heaves and ducks, but miraculously we didn't all die. The sound of many bloated explosions was just discernible along with that sickly scent of avocados. I waited with bated breath for Rimon, for any sight of Rimon. Just as our ship passed safely by the rocky arm and was fully out to sea, Rimon came flying from the island center, landing with a flop on the deck. "Oh, Rimon," was all I could say as I crumpled on the deck too. "I'm all right," he assured me, huffing. "Got 'em back to town. They were blowing left and right. Whole island's coming apart." "Reverie, what do you have there?" Dr. B asked, kneeling down beside me. I pulled the blanket back and showed him. "Oh my," he lifted the baby carefully up. "She's McRose's," I told him. "You mean this is McRose's miracle baby? She thought she was too old to get pregnant, but she did. I just assumed." "No," I shook my head firmly. "She's perfect. McRose was even sane when she had her. We heard the baby crying just as we were leaving the Cap's house. I guess she just had her or something." Rimon told the tale. She truly is a miracle," Dr. B said, tears weeping from his eyes. We set a course for the mainland with the help of the squiggly papers. It's a good thing a bunch of the cans was formula. Come to think of it, the ship was full of formula. Maybe just before all this, McRose had asked the captain to get her some, and it hadn't got the chance to be unloaded. In any case, we sailed off, and a couple days later, Rimon and I took off in the early evening air for a position scout to ensure we were on course and determine, if possible, how far he and I were from home. But then, the wind came up fierce and determined once again. The end. Maybe. Hello, I'm Sucrose. I'm a self-taught writer and illustrator, and this is my creepy Catholic sci-fi series, Windy Travels. But we need to keep reading. We need to find out what happens next. So let's go.